Our story begins with quite an unsettling image. A lifeless goose lies on the ground. A man collects it with a shovel and places it in his truck's back. Once inside, he spots a woman limping from his side view mirror. He rushes to her and asks her if she is okay, but she responds by pointing a shotgun towards him before getting into his truck to start driving. She screams as the title of the film is revealed. Interestingly, the loudness of it contrasts with the word quiet. Elsewhere, this same woman is packing the trunk of another vehicle. She is our protagonist, Meg. Her husband, Scott, is helping her pack. We are not given any details regarding the drastic action we previously saw her take part in. When the couple is riding, Scott asks if she is hungry. Though she says she is not, he starts to turn the truck somewhere anyway. It makes her repeat firmly that she isn't hungry. What Meg doesn't know is that he has turned to get gas. At the gas station store, Meg sees the cashier watching a television with her on it. The announcer says her return was a shock. She was assumed deceased by the police after she vanished from a parking garage 6 months earlier. A protester holds a sign stating it is always the husband's fault, emphasizing the word always. The couple rides on a road that is sandwiched by the woods. Scott informs Meg that his great-grandfather bought this place in the 1920s. During their ride, she sees a woman just standing in the woods facing them. The next scene shows them arriving at a house. In there, Meg asks Scott where his parents are. He says the adults mostly stayed at the big house, which used to be by the beach. It was torn down when he was a kid because no one could afford the property taxes. We learn further that his grandmother hated kids, and she put them in this house to not deal with them. Scott and the others would not see her all summer. Afterward, she would summon the kids to individually interview them about their interests. Meg asks if anyone else is going to visit this house, and he doubts it. It's rather empty in the winter, he says. At night, Meg has trouble sleeping whilst Scott snores comfortably. Thus, she gets up to have a small amount of food from the refrigerator. She follows this by looking at a framed photo on the wall. It was taken in 1932. She also looks at a plate that contains a statement about God on it. Suddenly, she hears a dog bark. As a result, she drops the plate due to being startled. She sees Scott standing oddly near the doorway and says his name. He draws closer to her, continuing to behave oddly. He is about to touch her, but instead the man turns around to walk away. Returning to bed, Meg looks at him. She says his name again for him to wake up. He hugs his wife and tells her she is safe. In the morning, she lets him know he was sleepwalking at night. Changing the topic, she asks if there is a dog in the area, for she heard one during the time he was sleepwalking. Its barking made her drop a plate. Scott asks which plate she broke. Looking for it, Meg can't find it. This prompts Scott to ask her if she remembers what her doctor had said, that sometimes nightmares can feel very real. Later, she walks outside near an outbuilding. Inside, she uncovers a motorcycle and sits on it. Back at the house, she tells Scott she's been thinking it would be nice if they spend Christmas at home. A barking dog interrupts their conversation. They also hear a woman, who Scott thinks is a lady named Madeline, so they go outside to encounter the dog. Seeing Scott, the woman hugs him. She is in fact who he thought she was. He asks her what she is doing in this place, to which she answers that she is staying at her mother's shack. As Madeline hugs Meg, she says she is very glad to see her again. Scott clears Meg's confusion by telling her that Madeline is her cousin. He reminds her they met at their wedding. Inside the house, Meg learns Scott's nickname is Talkie, because he did not say a word until he was 2 years old. Another thing she probably learns is that Madeline is a truly talkative person. At night, we hear faint sounds of a woman struggling somewhere. We see closet doors suddenly move as if she were behind them. This nightmare causes Meg to instantly wake up. On the next day, Scott plays tennis with his cousin. When Meg joins them, it becomes an unfair matchup of 2 against 1, depending on their skill level. Meg manages to strike the ball over the fence while Scott collects it. Madeline gives Meg some advice on how to play more efficiently. Meg seems slightly uncomfortable due to the somewhat intimate nature of Madeline's teaching. On the following morning, Meg reads a note Scott leaves her. It states he has gone to town for food. Once he returns, he sees her suffering on the floor and rushes to comfort her. In a calmer state, she tells him she used to count the footsteps in the old house she lived in. She has done it to find out how long it will take certain unspecified people to get to different areas of the house. It slightly helped her to know how long it would take them to get to her. Scott listens to her in a caring way. He whispers that the doctor said it would be helpful if she wrote in her journal during harsh moments like this. Later, the mood of the couple is completely changed. Scott pours her a glass of wine, but he thinks she hates it, so he is about to spill it out, but Meg says she loves the wine. Soon, Madeline joins them with her dog. She brings an eggplant and wants Meg to go to work on it without even asking her. Needless to say, her behavior is at least marginally rude. Meg tells her they weren't expecting her, as there are only 2 dishes on the table. Madeline learns it is 6:30 in the evening and says that if one goes to a restaurant in Paris at 8 p.m., one would be the first person there. Meg invites her to the current dinner, to which the latter says she does not want to impose. However, upon being asked a second time, she forcefully agrees. She surprises Scott with a bottle of whiskey. This prompts Scott to tell a historical fact about his family. His great-great-grandfather was a banker, and a man owed him money. After the markets crashed, the man could not pay in cash. Thus, Scott's great-great-grandfather allowed him to pay with many bottles of whiskey. Scott says they had a basement full of alcohol for almost 1 century, but they are nearly depleted of the substance now. Madeline proposes a toast to the fall of their great house. Alas, Meg gets left out of the clinging of glasses. At the dinner table, we see the discomfort Madeline brings with her demeanor. Her cousin behaves like everything is normal, yet Meg grows gradually uncomfortable with the woman. Meg is an engineer and isn't sure when she will be returning to work. Her position is still being reconfigured. Madeline's job is to take care of her mother along with the land. She makes a face that she says never stops. Since Scott says Meg was born in Seoul, Madeline starts speaking Korean to her. The problem is that Meg was adopted at the age of 3 and doesn't speak the language. Following this, she decides to feed the dog because it is near her. Madeline instantly tells her to stop it. She says if one teaches a dog to beg, it will never stop. There does not seem to be a moment of ease with the brash Madeline present. Left alone, Meg asks Scott to remind her how he is related to Madeline. He says they are cousins due to their fathers being brothers. He wants to know why she asks him this, and she says it's for her general knowledge. Furthermore, she asks why his cousin is talking Korean to her. He thinks she was just trying to connect. Meg looks at a framed photo of Korean children. He says the photo always makes him uncomfortable. His great-grandparents were there as missionaries. At night, Meg wakes up again with anxiety. She hears a thud and asks if it's Scott. Soon she sees he is hitting the wall slowly in a sleepwalking state. During the day, she walks alone on the beach. A man approaches her to say that she is walking on private property. The owners are very uptight about trespassers, he adds. Unbeknownst to him, her husband is one of the owners. Once he learns this, he apologizes. He says the summer crowd doesn't usually arrive this often. Scott was there last winter. Before she leaves, the man says he's sorry about what happened to her. We still don't know what she goes through. Later, she asks Scott why they never come out to this place. He answers there is simply too much family stuff here. Afterward, Meg is working on the motorcycle she found, wanting to get it to function. She walks in the woods the next day and sees a woman standing in the distance, seemingly looking at her. When Meg raises her hand to greet her, the woman walks away in the other direction. In a short time, she hears someone singing. She walks until she sees Madeline showering outside. She does not want to be seen, but Madeline catches her. She yells for Meg to enter the house. Inside, they both look at a painting where Madeline says that her mother became obsessed with oil painting during her time of being sick. The family in the painting they're looking at is Madeline's. The boy in it was her little brother, who passed away at the young age of 5. Madeline was merely 8 at the time. Meg says she thinks she saw Madeline's mom in the woods. The lady replies her mom is bedridden and hasn't left her room in months. She is nearing her demise. Once Meg notices a shotgun mounted to the wall. Madeline says coyotes can be a real menace. She sees Meg is nervous, making her ask what she's nervous about. She guesses it could be all this talk about lifelessness. Her mind segues into asking Meg if she is scared to perish, since she says everyone is. Madeline disagrees. Meg comments that some people think they go to a better place, whilst others think anywhere is better than here. Perhaps out of too much discomfort while talking to the woman, Meg asks to use the washroom. At a different time, she throws out Madeline's trash, and the bag rips, causing its contents to spill on the ground. Among the garbage, Meg finds a shard of the plate she shattered by accident previously. She realizes something is not right with Madeline. Following this, the trio occupies the dinner table. The cousins are having a good time talking about their shared past, but Meg feels distant. When the conversation turns to the topic of money, Madeline says they don't talk about it during dinner. Meg says only rich people think it's rude to talk about money. However, we learn that Meg is richer than Madeline and Scott. She acquired it from her parents' life insurance. Again, there is discomfort due to Madeline's presence. Meg says she is done eating even though she has a full plate of food. Scott informs his cousin that Meg does not like to eat in front of people anymore. Madeline expresses her pity for Meg, and the latter stands up abruptly, making her chair fall. She stuffs a forkful of food in her mouth and starts eating fast. She drops the fork and looks at Madeline to say she is done. The arrogant woman forms a face that communicates surprise mixed with discomfort. In another room, Meg looks at the shard she previously found in the trash. She hides it in a drawer the moment Scott enters. He lies in bed, which prompts her to ask if they are not going to talk about something. Sitting up, Scott says an unspecified they poisoned her food. It did not happen every time, but enough to keep her scared. He is sorry that she had to go through that. Angered, Meg says they made her create certain videos. They also made her beg Scott for help. Scott does not want to engage in this conversation tonight and walks away. In the morning, she does more work on the motorcycle. Finally getting it to operate, she starts driving. As she does, it's the first time we see her having fun. She stops to walk into a restaurant. There, the man from the beach approaches her. This is the environment in which he introduces himself. He is Joe. They both sit together and talk. Meg considers the place to be claustrophobic. she is most interested in asking about Madeline. Joe says he doesn't know her, despite knowing who she is. Meg asks him if Madeline was here with Scott last winter at the same time. Wanting to avoid getting into trouble, Joe questions if Meg can't ask Scott this question. Meg says that because she is asking him, he should answer her. Finding a way out of the pressure, he says he's not keeping a calendar every time he sees one of them. Meg says there is something peculiar about Madeline. She is troubled by her smile. Joe understands that in-laws are tough. Since a certain song starts to play, Joe wants Meg to dance with him. They engage in the movement and Meg enjoys herself again. Come night, Joe disallows her to drive the motorcycle because she is intoxicated. Once he starts walking her to his car, she becomes scared. She slaps him harshly and gets on the motorcycle to drive away. Returning home, she finds her husband sitting at the table with his back turned to her. He asks where she has been, without turning around. All she says is, she was out. While he walks away, Meg asks where he has been. She wants him to answer her. He does not want to, but she wants to talk about the videos. He didn't get any videos, he says. There is something they know that we don't, and it involves a driveway. She asks why he wasn't parked there on a certain night. She says he asked her to get his phone from the car, which was parked in the garage, and they never parked there. Thus, she repeats why he wasn't parked in the driveway. This confrontation is giving them a lot of anxiety. Scott walks slowly towards her, saying the police have already asked him these questions. He holds her head to the wall to whisper that they are satisfied with the answers he has given them. He wants to know why she isn't satisfied, but she cries. Meg walks away from this tense moment. She locks herself inside a room while Scott bangs on the door. He manages to break a sizable hole in it. In the next scene, she emerges from the water somewhere outside. Scott is there already, and they hug each other. This segment is likely a dream or a memory because, in the morning, she lies in bed, looking at the hole in the door. She exits the room and Scott is nearby to say he is sorry. Not saying anything, Meg starts going downstairs. The man meets her outside to say he does not know what is wrong with him. He walks closer to her to say he is sorry. After he kneels, he cries and insults himself for being an awful person. He also says he can't lose her again. He will do anything to gain her trust again. Once she says she wants to go home, Scott agrees. He wants to go home tomorrow, but she wants it done today. As he hugs her, she sees the strange woman looking at them from the woods. As they are getting ready to go, Meg realizes that their car has a flat tire. Scott tells her someone will arrive tomorrow to fix it, meaning they can't return home today like Scott agreed to do. At night, the couple is in the woods, where Scott says they will have one drink to say goodbye to this place. When Meg inquires why there, Madeline appears out of nowhere to rant about the parties they used to have there during their teenage years. The trio occupies an outhouse used for entertainment. Madeline's mom gets mentioned, and Meg says they should check on her before they leave. Yet the woman says her mother is very frail. She doesn't think the elderly lady would like to have company. Soon, Scott suggests a game called charades, which they start to play. After the cousins have had their turns playing, Meg's turn arrives. Her clue is interesting. It is the exact phrase that was on the plate she shattered. Since she becomes scared, the cousins draw closer to her. Madeline asks if she got a paper cut due to most of the clues being covered in blood. Madeline puts Meg's thumb in her mouth to remove the blood from it. Once Madeline leaves their proximity, Meg tells Scott that she wants to go home. Not understanding what she means, he says it's just a paper cut. Following this, the duo plays the piano together, and Meg watches them with unease. To feel better, she breaks a bottle over Scott's head, causing him to fall. His cousin keeps playing like nothing happened. Meg slams her head repeatedly against the piano for her to join Scott in the darkness of unconsciousness. The elderly woman watches through the window from outside. Of course, this was all simply Meg's imagination. The cousins are unharmed and they want to go swim in the ocean. They leave before Meg exits the outhouse. She watches from a distance to see them lying on the sand near the water. They seem to be enjoying themselves very much, whilst she is nowhere near the same level of happiness. Seeing Meg, they yell out for her to join them. Doing the opposite, she gets upset to the point of running away. She gets on the motorcycle she fixed earlier and starts driving away. As she drives, she faintly spots the woman she keeps seeing in the woods. She passes her several times, meaning she is Meg's hallucination. The strange lady stands on the road. However, we see she is a dog, and Meg crashes into it. Thankfully, she isn't injured, but the dog is likely deceased. On the next day, she wakes up near a tree. It's unknown how far away she was from the house, yet she returns to it on foot. Behind the glass, she sees Scott talking to Madeline normally, instead of him looking for his wife, or at least behaving anxiously regarding her whereabouts. Thus she enters loudly, and Scott directs himself toward her, asking where she has been. Meg has had enough at this point. She bluntly tells Madeline to leave the house. She repeats her statement loudly and much more rudely. Madeline leaves with disappointment without saying a word. Afterward, Meg searches for the keys because she wants to go home. Scott wants to know what is wrong with her. He wants to talk about this, but she does not. She says he knew Madeline would be there with them. She asks if the woman is even his cousin. He doesn't answer. He just sits down to hold his head in his hands. In that position, he says she is his cousin. Meg is confused as to why he even brought her to this place. Scott says sometimes it feels like Meg is not present, and she is seeing some things that he does not. Madeline was just trying to help, Scott adds. He thinks Meg needs help due to her not eating or sleeping well. Meg perceives the elderly woman sitting nearby. While she panics, Scott hugs her. The next scene has him bathing her. He starts to walk away, prompting her to grab his hand like she wants him to stay with her. They both kiss at this frail moment. At night, she wakes up alone in bed. Searching for Scott, she cannot find him. His absence seems to make her frantically search for the car keys. She removes a drawer that is hard to open and searches behind it with only her hand. In her blind search, she discovers a flash drive. Its hidden nature causes her to quickly take her laptop out to place the device inside of it. There is one video on the flash drive, nothing else. She watches the video. Meg pleads for help on the video. It devastates her to watch this. We hear a man who kidnaps her, telling her to speak to Scott on the phone, so she talks to him, saying her kidnappers are going to take her life. Meg screams in the video before screaming in the real world. Following this, she runs through the dark woods, hearing Madeline yell out to her dog. Meg ends up making it to her house. In there, she remembers how Madeline said that her mom is bedridden. She enters a certain room and finds no one there. What she finds instead is a document that states it is a petition for an appointment of an incapacitated person. Interestingly, it is filled out for Meg. Of course, our heroine isn't allowed to walk away after seeing such a document. Madeline surprises her by standing at the doorway with her shotgun, but all she says is that she's been looking for her dog and wants Meg to help her. Though her words may sound harmless, her presence is nothing short of sinister. Both of them are in the woods, looking for the dog. Soon they stop walking because Meg wants to say something was an accident. Madeline sees her deceased dog buried there, which is the same dog Meg crashed into earlier. Angered, Madeline wants to hurt her, yet Meg strikes her down unconscious. Later, Meg sits elsewhere with a restrained Madeline. When the latter awakens, Meg says she needs to know what happened. She asks Madeline who hired her kidnappers. She thinks it was either her or Scott. Since Madeline responds by throwing the F-bomb at her restrainer, Meg does something much worse. She points the shotgun at her. At this point, Madeline doesn't hold back with her abrasive persona. She tells Meg she won't ever feel normal again. She also says a person does not recover from something like what Meg is going through. It rewires one's brain. She thinks Meg will always feel like she is watching her life pass by behind glass. Eventually, she will be a burden. Meg tells her to be quiet many times, not wanting to hear such possibly truthful words. In a short time, Scott enters the room to find his cousin in such a state. Meg tells him he wants her to perish. She adds he wanted her to go to the garage for him to take her money. She thinks he did that to be with Madeline. When Meg says she watched the video, he shouts that he didn't do anything. He insists that he has no idea who took her. Furthermore, he says the first video was delivered to their apartment with a note while he was still in this area. He did not see it for almost 1 month and thought Meg was deceased. It was another month until another video arrived. At that moment, Scott didn't know what to do. He could not show it to the police, for they were investigating him. The man cries, saying he has already grieved for her. Drawing closer to Meg, he says he should have told her. She replies he grieved for her due to having missed the ransom note. Scott defends himself by telling Meg she is already lifeless in his mind. She keeps opposing him by calling him a coward. He collects the shotgun to point it at his wife. He cannot live like this, so he dares to squeeze the trigger. Fortunately, it does not fire. This allows her to shove the shotgun into him to give him pain forcefully. Poor Meg attempts to run away, but Scott brings her down. As he is choking her, she uses a nearby utility knife to injure his leg. She collects the weapon with ammo for it and escapes. Outside, Meg hears Scott insult himself like he did earlier. She surprises him with the loaded shotgun. However, she looks away for 1 second, enough time for him to bring her down again. This causes the scene to change to her falling elsewhere into the water. And during the day, Scott is with her like he was previously. Madeline is also there, kissing Meg's hand. After an unknown amount of time, Meg wakes up without Scott being present. It seems like he has decided not to take her life a second time. When she observes a vehicle riding close by, she runs to the road. Soon she encounters the man who drove it, and he happens to be the man from the start of the film. She limps towards him to point the shotgun at the unsuspecting man. Following this, Meg sits inside his truck to drive away. She screams in the process. We watch her drive for a while until she stops. Several seconds after she steps out, she hears a siren from a distance.